Hello everyone and welcome to the program. This is Sunday Politics on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimbalo in Lagos. Nigeria's COVID-19 confirmed cases was 1,273 with 40 deaths last week. That figure of the cases has almost doubled today, which is about 2,388 with 85 deaths. Take a look at what it is as of today. For some of the figures, 2,388 discharged people, 385 with 85 deaths. And tomorrow, the federal government says it will ease the lockdown order, which means that we're entering yet into another phase in the battle against COVID-19. What does that mean anyways, and how will that work? The federal government is afraid that there might be a spike should the lockdown be eased. Take a listen to the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 and the secretary to the federal government, Mr. Boss Mustafa, on Friday about these fears.
Eased up the lockdown, there have been spikes. Even our sister country very close by, Ghana, 10 days after the lockdown, the figures just went up. Germany had that experience. Several other countries have experienced that. And everybody is navigating the rough road, trying to find a solution to it. Part of what I see them do is that they try as much as possible, in spite of the spike, to ensure very strict compliance.
But what can we do to ensure that the spike, which was experienced in Germany and Ghana, does not happen in Nigeria? We're talking about less than 24 hours before we enter into that phase. Let's speak with the man who is in the know of how this whole thing is being managed. He's the general at the forefront tonight, the Director General of the National Center for Disease Control, Dr. Chikwe Ihekwazu, joins us from Abuja. So thank you. I'll call you General for tonight because this is war, an unseen enemy. It has been described, COVID-19. Tomorrow, Nigerians will go out in another phase in this battle after over 4 weeks of staying at home. But so there are fears that, is it the right time for us to ease the lockdown? That's a big question, isn't it, General Ihekwazu?
Hi, Sharon. Good evening, Nigerians. To be honest, I'll prefer to stick to my simple title of doctor. I'm a public health physician, and really, but you're right in terms of being in the middle of a crisis. It's an existential crisis, not only for Nigeria, but for our global community, the way we know ourselves, the lives we live, and our way of life generally. And the one thing you'll see is this is a struggle everyone is going through across the world. Whether you look north, west, east, south, everyone is going through this. And that's the point the leader of the Nigerian Presidential Task Force just alluded to. However, we are all learning. And it's important to remember, first, what was the purpose of the lockdown? 4 weeks ago, when Mr. President instituted these restrictions on movement across Nigeria, and focusing particularly on the 3 states of the FCT, Lagos and Ogun State. Now, there were 3 primary purposes. The one everyone remembers is, of course, we wanted to reduce the risk of transmission from one individual to another. And we achieved that to some extent. Our modeling shows that we had at least a 50% reduction of where the numbers would have been if we hadn't instituted those lockdowns versus where they are today. So there was some success there. Now, but there are 2 other critical objectives. One is to prepare the work that we were doing in collaboration with all the state governments across the country. So to enable the public health response, i.e. that very difficult case finding, identification, contact tracing, listing all your contacts, following them up, and enabling the development and maturity of that process. That's the second objective. The third objective was to enable the health system altogether to prepare for a completely new disease that had emerged in our landscape. that too has happened. So in terms of the primary objectives of the lockdown, they had been achieved. The objective was never, and to be clear, aiming at stopping transmission altogether before we restart our activities. We knew from the onset that that was not going to be possible in our context. So we needed some time to prepare ourselves for the easing of these measures from tomorrow. And this is not a complete easing. It's a very carefully calibrated easing of the measures. And we will collectively, not just the federal government or the state governments, we need to now collectively make sure that we manage these measures as articulated by the Presidential Task Force in order to keep ourselves safe and to begin a new normal in Nigeria, living with COVID-19. That is our reality. We can't get out of that reality until we get a vaccine, and everyone in the global space is working towards that goal. So until we get to that goal, we have to learn to live with this new reality. And whether we do it today or push it off 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we will still have to come to that inflection point. So Mr. President made a very difficult decision last weekend, literally weighing the pros and cons of all the data in front of him and, challenged us to start this process on Monday, tomorrow, and start a gradual relaxation, very gradual, very calibrated, in order for us to start living with this new reality and get to terms with it, preparing ourselves, our families, our communities, our workspaces for this reality. And really, that's the challenge all of us in Nigeria have from tomorrow.
So you're saying essentially that the issue of community transmission, which a lot of people feared, has doused, because if you look at the graph of the death, Dr. Ihekweazu, from 40 this time last week, to 85 today, does it look like a good time?
So, the trajectory of graphs are very difficult to interpret because deaths always lag behind cases to some extent. And remember, we have established that there is community transmission in 3 major cities, in FCT, Lagos, and Kano. 75% of all the cases in Nigeria still come from these 3 cities. And that's why one of the measures that have been kept in place by Mr. President is the restriction on interstate travel. Now, that is such an important restriction, and important for every Nigerian to understand why this is important. We have the outbreak in Nigeria, even though we show it on one curve, is really not one outbreak. We're seeing 3 significantly large city outbreaks in Lagos, in Abuja, and Kano that have instituted community transmission. In almost all the states, now we're beginning to see something like that happen in Borno, but in almost all the other states, we have found introductions, and many of them have been managed, limited to a few number of cases. So what we're trying to do is, throw our resources into these states that have established transmission. Try to limit spread in these states while preventing this virus from going to other states. Listen, the virus doesn't fly on its own to other states. They're carried by people. They're carried by individuals that are traveling. That's the only way the virus can get to Zamfara, get to Yobe, get to Bayelsa, is by people moving. And we have analyzed our own data and seen that most of the cases in other states have emerged out of travelers from these high-burden states. So what we're trying to do is keep some of the most important restrictions, such as interstate travel, international travel, large congregations. Those will remain almost completely banned until subsequent weeks, and Mr. President will evaluate the situation, while we start easing some of the restrictions on workplaces, so some of our economic activities can start, because the economic activities are linked to livelihoods, which are linked to lives. So these are the decisions that were made. So in summary, I wouldn't read too much into the number of deaths. It's an emerging situation, and we will continue monitoring this very carefully, but also always make sure that Nigerians are well informed to the best of our ability of the status of the epidemic every evening with the data that we release.
another phase where a lot of Nigerians are carefully looking at how this will pan out from tomorrow. Some people may have been used to the lockdown and adapting themselves into it. Talk us through how this will work out from tomorrow. If you look at what has happened over the last, some of the guidelines for the ease of the lockdown right there on the screen, Dr. Ihekwazu. It was difficult implementing the lockdown, in fact. But now, going into this phase, how do you hope that the partial or the ease of the lockdown will go in terms of implementation?
Yeah, so Sharon, I really think every new, every new directive to do things is always difficult in the beginning. So I would really forgive a lot of Nigerians who have struggled with this in the early days. But what I always urge people is to keep at it. We will get better. So people really often jump to judgments on how well people performed in the first days of the advice to wear masks or on the early days of hand washing. And because these are new and difficult. But what I know is that people have been getting better at this. Communities have found ways to implement this, to put up hand washing basins in front of their offices, to use sanitizers. I see an increasing number of people wearing masks when I go out. So Nigerians know what to do. And I'm confident that we will get to where we want to be by carrying everyone along. Not by government saying you must do this, but by Nigerians themselves saying this is what we need to do as a people to stay alive. This is what I need to do for my business to stay in business. This is what I need to do as a family to keep my family safe. This is the only way we can achieve anything out of the new measures we are requesting. And to be honest, I categorize these measures into two. There are some of the things like hand washing and sanitizers that I hope that we will continue to do well after this outbreak. I hope never to be in a situation where I am advising Nigerians to wash their hands regularly. This must become a way of life for us. The use of sanitizers where water is not available must become a way of life. So there are many of these restrictions that I hope will become contingent on how we wake up every day and live our lives. The more difficult things for us that we will have to endure over the next few weeks, such as wearing masks, keeping at least 2 meters apart from each other, the restriction on mass gatherings. These are new and very difficult for us because, we are a social people. Even our workplaces are social environments. So we will all have to learn. So if I was a business owner right now in Nigeria, if I owned a restaurant, for instance, I would be thinking, firstly, how do I keep my staff safe? How do I bring them into work tomorrow to work safely? How do I need to re-engineer my work environment so that I can enable them to stand at least 2 meters apart from each other to do the work? I would also be thinking, how do I receive my customers tomorrow morning? Do I let in 20 people at a time? Or do I maybe restrict it to 5 and then 7 and maybe build up to 10 and make sure they're physically distant? Do I insist that they wash their hands before coming in? So every business owner over the last week, and that's really why Mr. President gave us an extra week, is for us to prepare for this new reality. And the fact is, this will stay with us for the next few weeks and months. So we have to learn to live with it. But despite all the detailed work the PTF has done, all the state governments in Nigeria, some of them have actually started making masks, distributing to people. Ultimately, none of this will be enough if Nigerians themselves don't say, listen, guys, let's do this. Let's do this as a country. Let's do this as a people. Let's do this as a business. That's really the only way we can enable us to get over this very difficult few months ahead of us as we build up towards living safely with COVID-19 in our communities. It is possible, but it's not possible without the collaboration, cooperation, and integration of every Nigerian into the response.
Dr. Ihekwazu, have we peaked yet before we start talking about flattening the curve? Have we gotten to that point where you talked about a few weeks ago that we needed to see that the graph peak before we start dropping? Have we gotten to that point yet?
Yeah, Shenwu, it's very difficult to say. I don't think we've gotten to that point. You know, what has happened over the last few weeks is we have been building up our testing capacity. You would remember that we received a lot of criticism on how quickly and how many people we could test. We took all of that criticism on board, but throughout every single day, every single night, we were working hard to build up on that testing capacity. And we have been doing that every single day. We now have 18 labs across the country. Today, my team has just left for Port Harcourt. Over the next couple of days, they'll be activating that lab. Then they have a few others over Anambra, Gombe, that are on the list to be activated next. So every single day, the NCDC team has been working hard to increase our testing capacity. As we increase our testing capacity, the inevitable happens. We will find more cases. I'm just coming back from Kano today, where we went to open a brand new lab supported by the private sector, 54 gene implementing with the Dangote Foundation supporting financially, increasing the testing capacity in Kano alone to over 600 tests per day by next week. So as we increase testing capacity across the country, we will see numbers rise, but it is okay for it to rise because we are gaining visibility into what we were not sure about. And it's only by gaining visibility, by understanding the scale of the outbreak, the distribution, its spread, that we can really start mobilizing the resources within government, outside government, to respond appropriately. And, you know, Sheun, I'd like to end this by just saying there's never been a time I have seen, in my short experience, government, the private sector come together around a problem. You know, I was in Kano today. You know, with the private sector, different parts of the private sector, the federal government, the Ministry of Health, the NCDC, the state government, you know, all thinking together, how do we solve this problem? Nobody was kind of fighting for visibility or for prominence. You know, everyone was focused on the problem. And if there's one thing that I hope comes out of this, is really, you know, the translation of this spirit into day-to-day life in our country and translating some of the expertise that we're bringing to fore to really address some of the longer-term challenges that we have in the health sector, which has really led us to the vulnerable position that we found ourselves in, and maybe start doing something about these.
The United States has activated, through the advice of the FDA, the medication remdesivir. Are we making use of that help in terms of, because I understand that medication also hasten the treatment and the recovery of patients of COVID-19? Dr. Yekwazo, remdesivir is a medication that the United States has activated through the advice of the FDA. Is Nigeria adopting that line of medication too?
Yeah, so I'm really happy you brought up this question because it's kind of a victory for science. You know, over the last few days, we've gotten emerging evidence for the first drug that has shown evidence of efficacy. It's a drug called remdesivir that came to prominence over trials to use it for the Ebola virus, where it didn't really work. So those trials did not show that it worked for Ebola. But these drugs remain in our arsenal. We now tried it in a clinical trial, and we have seen that it does produce benefit to people. And, you know, in the beginning of this outbreak, there was a lot of pressure, not just on NCDC, on state governments across the country to buy and invest in medications. I won't name them by name, but many types of pills, both conventional, medical, and everything else. And I stood firm and said, listen, we have to wait for the science to come through for us, for the clinical trials to evolve, because what we don't want to do is give people something. Not only are we not sure it works, it could actually cause harm. Many of these drugs that we take have side effects. And if we don't know that the benefits outweigh the side effects, then as a doctor, I am causing more harm to my patient. And the one vow as a doctor that we take as most sacrosanct is to cause no harm. So I'm actually happy that finally some clinical trial evidence has emerged about a new drug. What we now need to do is gain access to this drug. It's a difficult process at the moment, but we've started those conversations to enable access to Nigerians. We will speak with NAFDAC to hasten, speed up the regulatory process so we can make this drug accessible and available to Nigerians. So it's the first step, and that's how science works. Sometimes it's slower than we want it to be, and we would like it to be, but that's really what we have to do. And the same is for vaccines, the same for drugs, and the same for all the other measures that we need to now put in place. We need to be sure that they work before we throw them out for Nigerians to use.
We will get our closing moments with you after this break, and we will touch on one or two issues when we come back. Stay with us, Dr. Ekwazu. We take a break, and coming up next on the program, the federal government gives a nod to borrowing 850 million naira internally, and the IMF gave $3 billion US. What are the implications on the Nigerian economy? We'll talk about that with Professor Mohalu when we return from this break, and our closing moments with Dr. Ekwazu.
I want to assure all Nigerians that this is a fund that is going to be used judicially for purposes that are including health, social development, as well as bridging the very significant revenue shortfall that we have. We have had to put in place and assure the multilateral institutions that are borrowing us governance structures to ensure that the funds are used properly and that there is transparent reporting in the use of the funds. The National Assembly will, of course, be also exerting their oversight function on the use of these funds.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's get our closing moment with Dr. Chikwe Ekwazu. He's the Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. Thank you so much, Dr. Ekwazu, for your time tonight. Since you were talking about the trials and possible treatment for COVID-19, NAFDAC talked about the clinical trials for chloroquine. Well, America has also been talking about hydroxychloroquine. Any feedback on or the success or any kind of feedback on chloroquine and the clinical trials on that?
So thanks a lot. There's no evidence yet that hydroxychloroquine provides any benefit, and that's the point I was trying to make, that the use of this drug should only be limited to settings where we use it in the context of a clinical trial. There's been a lot of pressure to procure a lot of hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine and start distributing and start using. And we've always asked people to exercise caution until we have the evidence, just like we have from this study, that it actually works, because no drug comes without harm. Harmful to the individual taken. So we needed that evidence to be out. It's not out yet. So our guidance is clear on the NCDC website on what to use to manage people. And it doesn't include hydroxychloroquine at the moment.
So are we also considering, is there any success or any feedback also on some of the measures that Nigeria is taking? We understand that Nigeria is also looking at vaccine, research on vaccine. Any progress on that too?
So, vaccine development for a new disease, it's a very complex process. And what we're doing is trying to contribute to the global efforts around this. So we're going to be part of something called the Solidarity Trial, which is evaluating several, both therapeutics and vaccine candidates. Ultimately, even when you do the phase 1 and phase 2 trial of a vaccine, once you start getting to actually trying out in humans, you need people across different countries, different parts of the world, to take some of it and to show that it works and causes no harm. So we're part of a much broader global effort in different research objectives in different aspects of the response. So it's really a long-term project. Firstly, respond to the outbreak, minimize the number of cases, but at the same time, invest in developing the knowledge, some of which we'll do ourselves, some of it we'll do in collaboration with others, to really gain a better understanding of this new disease and learn how to, one, either stop transmission or minimize the deaths and severe cases of those already infected from this virus.
So there is the NCDC bill, and a lot of Nigerians are talking about it. For example, on Tuesday, we understand that there might be some conversation on the floor of the National Assembly about that bill. Talk us through what is the input of the NCDC. Let's get your reaction on that.
So my reaction on it is not an NCDC bill. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control is well established by an act of Parliament. It was passed in 2018, so we're very comfortable with the act establishing the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. This is a new infectious disease bill. My understanding is that it was introduced by the House of Representatives. I can understand where it is coming from. I think many people are frustrated with the landscape of infectious diseases and our ability to institute the measures that we need to control the spread of infectious diseases. But we haven't had the opportunity yet to review the bill. We weren't part of the consultation process in bringing up the bill. So I saw it for the first time 2 days ago. So my reaction is that, yes, I do think there's a need to consider our public health laws altogether. The Quarantine Act was from pre-independence times. So there's definitely a need to consider a new public health, a legal public health law and the whole legal landscape for public health. But I do think, to be honest, my personal view is that the middle of a crisis is not the best time to do this. We need to get out of this, consult widely, and then come up with decisions that we can all really adhere to, both at the federal and state level. You know, public health is very broad. A lot of responsibilities don't actually lie with the federal government. They lie with the state and local governments to implement. So there needs to be wide consultation on where the powers lie, and that, I think, is better done after the crisis, when we get out of the acute phase of the response. And really, that will be my reaction whenever I'm asked. But for now, let's hold on to it. It is important to do, but now is not the right time to review the law while you're still in the middle of a war.
The WHO has indicated it will be commencing vaccine in Nigeria. Would it be voluntary or compulsory, and where would that be starting?
So I haven't heard about that. I would be very surprised if such a statement had come out of WHO, because I would be the first person to be consulted on naturally. But what I can say is that we're working very closely with WHO, that are major and primary partners and our inflow into the global space. So we collaborate on almost everything we do. We have a large WHO team working with us here, and whenever there is an opportunity for a vaccine, we will be working with them to introduce this into the Nigerian population. You know, there's been a lot of questions and sometimes commentary about trials and all of that. You know, there can't be a new drug or a new vaccine if we don't do clinical trials. And clinical trials are never done in one place or the other. They're done across the world in different settings, across different ages and populations. So we're part of a global problem, and we will always also be the part of a global solution. And I think we are tired of not being participants in the solutions. This has been our fate for many years, and that's really the drive of the Federal Ministry of Health, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, and all the other federal government agencies involved in this response. We want to participate not only in the acute phase of managing the outbreak, but we want to be active participants in the long-term solutions that will lead us to be in a better space around our health security issues. We don't want tomorrow to be struggling for reagents to do the tests, or to be looking for equipment to carry out a laboratory diagnosis, or to be struggling with vaccines. We want to come out of this outbreak much stronger across all aspects of health security. And for every minute I spend on the outbreak itself, I spend 2 minutes thinking about how do I build better for the future? How do I build a better health security architecture for the country so that we are never found again in this situation where we have been in the past 4 years scrambling for a little bit of resources to build up our health security architecture, and when no one really took it seriously enough. So we must come out of this stronger as a country, stronger as an agency, and stronger as a public health community, better placed to protect Nigerians from the threats of infectious diseases.
You said earlier in the week that you were struggling with bed spaces in Lagos. Has that been resolved?
Yeah, the first thing to say, Shehu, that the provision of bed spaces really is the responsibility of state government. So I will kind of leave the details of how many beds and all of that are available to our state governments to answer. One thing I know for sure is how hard they've been trying. Just yesterday, you see that the Lagos state government opened a whole new facility in Bagada. I know they've been working on this for many weeks. It's not easy. So I really doff my hat and give the state government a lot of respect. I'm just coming back from Kano, where they were doing exactly the same thing, supported by some private sector actors. So everybody is trying to increase the bed capacity. And this really is the challenge. As we at NCDC and our partner labs increase the number of tests we're doing, we find more positive cases. The natural consequence of those positive cases, they all have to now be brought into care. So every state government right now, I'm sure, is putting together, increasing its bed capacity in order to bring in the patients. The purpose of bringing in patients is different here. Normally people come into care just for their own individual care. But this time we're asking people to come into care not only for their own benefit, but to also stop transmission to others. So the provision of care is not only serving a clinical purpose, it's also serving a public health purpose. And this is a really difficult balance to find, but I'm sure in collaboration with all the state governments across the country, we will get to a better place and ensure that we continue building both temporary and permanent structures where we can bring in patients into care, provide them the care they needed, and prevent them from transmitting this virus to others.
What would you say to those who think that we are doing poorly in terms of our testing capacity? Less than 20,000 so far, isn't it, Dr. Ekwazu? Compared to Ghana, which is just less than half of our population, or even South Africa, they've tested way over 100,000 people in that country.
Yeah. So, Sharon, let me start with the positives. We've been building up our testing capacity every single day. We're now between 1,000 and 2,000 tests per day. So you will see those numbers go up quickly. With the testing, we're solving for 3 problems. Firstly, we're trying to bring the tests closer to people. So the number of tests is not the only variable we're counting. We also have to bring tests closer. And sometimes the solution to bringing a test closer to the people in Sokoto or the people in Bayelsa is not the same solution that will increase the number of tests. So we're solving for 3 problems. Firstly, to bring the test closer to people. Secondly, to increase the numbers that we can test in the high incidence states, so Lagos, FCT, and Kano. And then thirdly, to build for the future. And we're trying to do these 3 things simultaneously. I worked in South Africa for 3 beautiful years in my career before coming back to Nigeria. I understand the investments that they made over the past 50 years in building up the National Health Laboratory Service in South Africa and how that has now supported their response. I know what is going on in Ghana. They're using a slightly different approach to testing, one that we have considered, but ultimately decided at the moment it wasn't right for us because there's a price to pay. And so we looked at what Ghana is doing. They have decided to go along a different path. We looked at that path And together with everyone involved in testing in Nigeria, we decided that it wasn't a path that was suited for our circumstances. So one thing I'll assure everyone in this space, there's no magic bullet out there. If you have one, please bring it and we will consider. But while we're waiting for that magic bullet, we will continue to do what we do every day, building on what we have, relying on the infrastructure that we have at the moment while increasing incrementally. And we have set for ourselves publicly a target of testing 2 million people in the next 3 months. That's the target we're working to, and every day we're building up to that target. We know the importance of testing in enabling us control this outbreak. The Presidential Task Force has really backed us in terms of providing us the resources and ability to meet these targets. All our partners, the UN, the United States government, everyone together has come together to say, listen, let's build for the future. And that is what we'll keep doing every day. And Nigerians will see the testing numbers increase. That's one reason why we see our case numbers increase, actually, every night. So, in Nigeria, sometimes you can't win. Our cases are going up because our testing numbers are going up. So we are building, and I'm confident that we will get to the goal that we want to achieve. But sometimes there's a price to pay for speed. We don't want to be the quickest out of the starting blocks. We want to be the first to reach the finishing line. And there are compromises to be made. We're making them while building better for the future.
Perhaps another very major question on the minds of a lot of Nigerians is how far we have come in learning what the process and also trying to find solutions, local solutions. For example, some people will talk about the herbs in Madagascar and how they're utilizing the local procedure in solving their problems. So far, how good has it been for Nigeria in terms of maybe reducing the test time, the duration for the test, and also finding local solution like the herb situation we find in some other countries, and in fact, some other people will talk about Cuba.
Yeah, sure. Well, I too have heard with a lot of excitement about the news out of Madagascar. I've been trying to find a little bit more detail on what exactly it is and how it's being used and things like that. So we're working on finding more information until we really understand what is being given to people. I can't really recommend whether it should be used or not in our context. When I visited China a few months ago, Chinese traditional medicine is very much integrated into the care being provided that was provided to patients that had COVID-19 in China. So I do think there's a role for traditional medicine generally in making people recover through different ways. My responsibility is to have a clear understanding of what works and what doesn't work before I recommend that to Nigerians. And this is really a sacred responsibility for whoever is leading an organization like mine. I can't really work and make decisions on anecdotes or WhatsApp videos or whatever is thrown at you every day as the magic solution. We have to sit back, evaluate this, make a critical decision for Nigerians. So by the time we say, listen, Nigerians, use this, we can sit back and know that we have made the best possible recommendation for Nigerians. So in my position, I have to be very careful in what I recommend because it's not a personal opinion. It becomes the opinion of the instituted authority to do so. So we're looking very carefully at treatments, therapeutics, vaccines, diagnostics, and whatever works, I will be the first person that will push for its introduction into the landscape in Nigeria. But first, we have to know whether it works. There's no shortcut. We have to be sure that something provides benefit before we introduce it into the Nigerian population, no matter how popular it is on social media or in other contexts.
Dr. Chikwe Ihekweazu, the Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, thank you so much. We have an extended time tonight talking to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks a lot, Shehu. Let's work together from tomorrow to make sure that we can collectively take responsibility for the measures Mr. President has asked us to start off with tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much. The General Ekwazu, like I called you earlier on the program, one of those in the front lines of managing and combating the COVID-19 war. We're trying to establish connection with Professor Kingsley Mohalo and also Mr. Femi Falana. We'll take another break. When we come back, we get into those conversations with Professor Mohalo and Mr. Femi Falana.